Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. Just like they failed in regards to interpreting the Bible, they fail in regards to romantic justice. This video is about universal romantic justice in regards to dating recommendations versus white republicanism, Zionism, LGBT logic, and Satanism. Now, I'm probably going to have to do this as a video series, so we'll talk about universal romantic justice, and we'll talk about the white Republican scale of so-called romantic justice, of their romantic justice, right? Which is not justice and it's not romantic, right? It's not romantic, it's not justice. Okay, so point number one in regards to universal romantic justice. What is clearly universally logical is for men who are born straight or are straight to have a suitable helper. It's not very hard to make a situation, and to create a system and to create social relations, romantic relations, and gender relations, and internet sites, etc. in a way that is infinitely more fair. It's not very hard. The reason why dating is unfair is because you live in a white, Jewish, and LGBT supremacist system. And they do immature stuff to try to make it harder for me to even make this video. I mean, it is like the most immature fraternities you've seen in your life, just lashing out and acting like a rock and roll person, an arrogant corporate person, an arrogant royal who feels entitled, etc. So as a result, we see that not only do people not have suitable helpers, their relationships are very lacking. See, sometimes people date underage females, they turn gay when they otherwise wouldn't. You see all kinds of problems. They're getting catfish on the internet, having phone sex with guys thinking it's a female. I mean, there's so many problems, and there's a bunch of LGBT people, racist whites and racist Jews preying on everyone, and everyone knows it. I'd love to hear a counter-argument. Okay, I would love to hear a counter-argument. Let's debate this anytime you want. So now let us assume that Will Smith is a 6 out of 10 or so, for a point of reference. It is clear that not only should someone who is an 8, 9, or 10 not have to settle, but also someone who is a 6 like Will Smith or so. In order to achieve universal romantic justice, one must be honest about how good-looking people are, and perhaps more importantly, why they are good-looking, if they are. So again, we have to be honest about how good-looking people are, how they look. And we have to be honest about why they're good-looking. Do they come from a long line of privileged people like European elitists, like Zionist elitists who coerce attractive women, who brainwash women using rape by deception? Okay? And then as a result, over time, their kids have better genes? Or are they more like me, where I come from a long line of righteous martial artists who forged the most desirable genes ever possible? Pretty straightforward. For those of you who struggle with that, ask yourself, why do white people often get tans? Why is Egypt seen as a more beautiful nation than Greece or Rome in terms of the people? Or Babylon or Persia, what have you? Ask yourself why strippers and swimsuit models and models try to have more of an African shape. Are they trying to be thick Europeans, shorter Europeans, tall, skinny Europeans who don't have very attractive, we'll just say it bluntly, breasts and behinds? Or are they trying to be like a, whatever race they are, version of a black person, an Ethiopian person, what have you? Okay. And that is also something that has to do with romantic justice, right? Blacks are the most stigmatized group, and they've downplayed that a real reason why that is, a very straightforward reason, one of many, is because their spectrum of attractiveness naturally goes beyond other people. Lots of black people aren't that attractive. I'm not saying that all of them are attractive. I am not saying that. Lots and lots of black people, after years of poverty, after years of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, what have you, lots of them aren't very attractive. Many of them are just average. But the spectrum, right? Eritrea, Ethiopia, some people in Nigeria, the spectrum goes beyond other groups of people. Why are Brazilians seen as so attractive? African genes. Why are Puerto Ricans so often seen as attractive? African genes. Why are Ethiopians so attractive? African genes. What did they do in Greece and Rome? They mixed with Ethiopians. They mixed with African genes. What did they do during the transatlantic slave trade? They mixed with African genes. A Mexican is basically a Mexican, right? And they're mixed to a large degree with African genes, be it through Jews who are mixed with Ethiopian or blacks who came there during the slave trade. In fact, 1% of Mexicans are said to be black. Okay. So where are we here? Okay. Obviously, the system the world is using now with its nations and compartments and corporate partnerships is clearly an evil rape by deception system and a grouping of rape by deception systems. I thank God with all my heart that I am not part of that system. I would have wasted the best years of my life being part of their system if I had come into their cultures. Instead, I manned up while other people and their spirits were whimpering, as I chastised females for being raped by deception, promoting gold-digging groupies with no heart. Instead of selling out for a chicken head ass bitch. So I chastised them instead of selling out for one of these groupies, these heartless people, these horrible people that shun the most righteous person that ever lived. One needs the Royal African Falcon top martial arts point of reference, obviously heterosexual and transcendent. And I've proven that I am that idea as a half black, half white person. My father's line, my patriarchal line is Nigerian. Nigerians have very potent genes. Of the dominant African genes, Nigerians are probably the bell that rings the loudest. If a Nigerian male married an Ethiopian female, whose genes do you think would dominate? And if an Ethiopian male married a very pronounced Nigerian female with very pronounced warrior genes, will those warrior genes just disappear? Some Nigerians have the most dominant genes on the planet when it comes to gene expression at least. Okay. Where was I here? Okay, so without being honest about this point of reference, one becomes the blind and they lead the blind and they both fall into a pit. Think about it. If we don't tell the truth about Nigerian genes, if we don't tell the truth about African genes, if we don't tell the truth about Ethiopians, if we don't tell the truth about me, the most righteous person, it's even called good looking, being good, that inner beauty resonating and being expressed, right? The inner beauty coming with the genes and with the spirit and with the destiny and with God's will to forge the most handsome person that ever lived, which is me in my pinnacle. Psalm 45, right? Humility is the fear of the Lord. I fear God far too much to point to someone else when I know at one point in my life I was the most universally handsome person ever possible. Maybe in 2016 or so. Okay. And you can imagine, I don't anticipate that that's going to get me a hot chick or something. Or that I'm going to get some kind of award or some kind of money for it or anything. There's no benefit. People are going to hate me for saying that. And they are hating me for saying things like that. But I'm still going to say it because that's doing God's work. I'm going to humble myself to accept the criticism and the hardship from saying something that, yeah, it makes me proud. But I know it comes with hardship. When one declares the glory of God in that particular way, in this jealous, petty society, where there's all kinds of jealous, racist, LGBT people, where there's all kinds of jealous, racist, white supremacists, communists, Jewish supremacists, and various groups of racial supremacists who have false pride and lash out and basically clearly worship the devil. From every race, mind you, including black people. No offense to anybody, this is the truth. Some people just call them haters, but that word is nowhere near potent enough. So now let's get to the white Republican scale. This video is about comparing the motive, the formula, the model, and the output of the different scales of romantic justice. The white Republican, like his Jewish and token minority allies, seeks to reestablish and reinforce an oligarchy, wittingly or otherwise. So immediately they fail. Can you imagine having a divine relationship why you seek to reinforce an oligarchy? I've never even heard of a white supremacist whose arguments aren't about reinforcing the white power structure, right? They want people to kiss up to a bunch of rich white people and relatively rich middle-class white people who act like slave masters and social controllers. That's what it's about. That's what white supremacy philosophies are about, with an emphasis on sexual control. We'll get to that. The white supremacists work to make, and the white Republicans and the white supremacists work to make a more defined system of white supremacy, where straw men are used to prevent people from arguing that universal pinpoint and moral precision is better. Okay? So when you're a white supremacist, you know you're treating people unfairly unless you're a complete idiot, right? You can't just say, we brought you technology, so we should do what we want, right? It's stupid. Everyone sees through that. It's dumb. So what do? They create straw men. They say things like, we was Kangs, and Shaniqua thinks this or that, okay? To their extreme disgrace. As if black people are all magically like the worst of them, right? They make such stupid arguments. It's just dumb. They're so immature. It is painful to see Republicans make their arguments. It is painful to see white supremacists make their arguments. It is painful to see Democrats who play stupid make their arguments. It is so painful. The thing I've stressed over the most in life is probably the stupidity of the governing class. Okay. The white supremacists and the white Republicans, who are basically white supremacists, seek to use wordplay to confuse people about the fact that people come from Africa. Now, bear with me here. Some of you are like, how can they confuse people about that? Okay, you can know something and still be confused about it. For example, if you go to a bar and you have a few drinks and something tells you, hey, you shouldn't have any more drinks, and you know way better, but you do it anyway. That is the type of way they seek to confuse you about the fact that people come from Africa. They work with various science departments to make it so that the word human has certain connotations. Again, so that the word human has certain connotations that falsely define a human being in a Eurocentric and neocolonial way. They want you to think of a human being as like, George Bush or something. I mean, it's a bad example. As the colonists, the English colonists that came to America. They want you to think of it in terms of whiteness, in terms of white people over the years. When in the reality, like, pay close attention. I'm not racist. This is the truth. In reality, a human being is something that is indigenous. A concrete jungle person is someone trying to form an abomination, regardless of how far along they are or aren't. That's what they're trying to do, wittingly or otherwise. Okay? A natural human being is what a human being is. And a human being in his perfected form is in the martial art order, preferably a martial artist, in his perfect form, the top martial artist ever possible. Moving in a way that is natural. Seeking God, looking at nature and getting a deep and profound message that God put there for him to see. Not looking at it in a shallow way, with a gay agenda, trying to favor white supremacy, trying to favor LGBT supremacy, but looking at it in or Jewish supremacy, looking at it in a very deep and profound way. That's what a human being is meant to be. We are indigenous to Africa, not to Europe or anywhere else, to Africa. As humans left, they started changing, but that's okay. That's predictable. We'd expect human beings to change with nature. Again, we'd expect human beings to change with nature. But when they started going unnatural and putting a special emphasis on what the Masons call the self-direction of humanity, with eugenics and social engineering and scientific racism, and trying to scientifically control reproduction, and trying to get people to see things a certain way, brainwashing them with powerful propaganda and military-grade psychology and technologies, when they started doing things like that, and this goes back hundreds of years, mind you. And in recent years, they've made great advances to the detriment of humanity in regards to these things. When they started doing that, they started forming abominations. People aren't so human anymore, they're abominations. And they want to confuse you about that and make it seem like it's magically the natural human direction or something. And a lot of Christians, for example, must be aware of this, because the Bible talks about this stuff to some degree. It talks about Babylon's magic spell. It talks about the dangers of becoming unnatural and having unnatural desires for each other. Okay. White supremacy also seeks to make people of color disproportionately LGBT. And the Bible talks about the unnatural lusts of LGBT people and Babylon's spell. And Babylon was like a concrete jungle in its own right. And so there was these concrete jungle types trying to spread homosexuality, which is part of what Babylon warns about. And because the devil is tricky, you know, he tries to make it seem like it's other people doing it and not him. And so the main people doing it are whites, Jews, and LGBT people, and their leadership specifically, okay, according to their deeds. And they seek to make people of color seem like the angry red savages who are the problem, or whatever they're calling people these days. Okay. And notice the devil wears red, and that's why even though Native Americans aren't red, they called them, you know, angry red savages. When white people get hit by the sun, again, I'm not racist, I'm part white, they turn red. In fact, it was so common that Set, who is a deity of white people to a large degree, and black people where they're evil, okay, those who were evil, you know, the color red was associated with them. There's some white people who are redheads, right? You see them in Northern Europe, right, in various places. And now your hair color alone doesn't determine your character, but bear with me. And when they get sunburned, what have you, they turn red when they blush. So they said, hey, this color red, which has to do with blood and shedding blood and so on and so forth, is associated with these people. So of the associations made with Set, the color red was one of the associations. Of course, he's a deity of foreigners and storms and chaos. And you see that he really took hold in Europe through Zeus and Jupiter, where from there they took over the world. Now again, if you want to do the right thing, regardless of race, you should rally and obey God through me. Your history is not going to determine who you are completely. After my flesh dies, there'll be no way to be right with God, and that's important. But you should still try to do the right thing to the best of your ability. You won't go to heaven, you know, unless you obey God through me in a timely fashion, and no one should reproduce no matter what. But you should still try to do the right thing. Okay. These are just the facts here, and we're talking about white Republican supremacy. And as they have so rudely, as a group, tried to force their ways on the world, they're cultural imperialists, what have you. It is so much more than fair for me to say these things. So fair. All right. So, again, they work with various science departments to make it so that the word human has certain connotations that falsely define a human being in a Eurocentric and neocolonial way. They have people who are brutes that say things like, here we go again, in order to prevent constructive discourse on this matter. Constructive discussions, you know, actually discussions that would lead to solving the issue. They don't care so much if people discuss it as controlled opposition. They discuss things like this all the time. They care that if people discuss in a way that would cause a solution to come about, right? People to rally, people to, you know, put billboards out there, people to make it clear, which would interfere with their psychological campaign, which may very well cause a certain amount of people to refuse the Satanism that is known as white supremacy. Even though countless white and Jewish people like exotic females just as much, and at times more than white females, they seek to try to reinforce one race dating. That's a very erotic desire culture, right? The word erotic is like the word exotic, and they both have the word tick in it, like the word romantic. Roman tick. Erotic and exotic. Think about the typical angry Republican. Okay. We see that the ideas of selflessness, honesty, purity, and charity are misrepresented in their culture and cultures. But one can still read between the lines to see what they really are. The reason why they do that, one might argue there's no way for them to proceed with evil without doing something like that, right? Without misrepresenting these ideas and trying to convince you that, that their culture actually magically has these things. But it's to cause you to make a conscious decision to be evil, to know what good is on various levels, and to do what is stupid, which is to consciously choose evil and to commit to evil in the name of just trying to make the best of it, protect your family, what have you. That's why Matthew 10, the Bible warns that he who loves their family more than God, they're not going to heaven. If they teach their kids to love their family more than God, how much more do they deserve to burn in hell? How much more will they burn in hell? They seem to think that oppressing the poor and making it so people are desperate is magically a good idea, as they can exploit them from there. They do not seem to appreciate that the governing class is white, Jewish, and LGBT, and not just Jewish or Jewish and LGBT. Okay, when we're talking about the white Republicans, that is, the white supremacists. They want to sabotage everyone, including them and their offspring and families, but they are too busy following the footsteps of their forefathers to appreciate the situation. So, the governing class also includes white people. One might argue they're mostly white. That's a complicated kind of racial discussion for another day. However, what I'm talking about is that these people seek to sabotage everybody. They're self-destructive. It's like those rock stars, right? Who get all the piercings, heavy metal, freaks, punks. They're self-destructive and they're bringing people down as well. That's the governing class. They are self-destructive. When you're evil to the degree that the governing class is, you are destroying yourselves to the extreme. There's no words for how much they hate themselves and their offspring. And they're bringing everybody down by getting them to choose to try to survive rather than putting righteousness first, whether or not they die. Righteousness and courage first. And not being afraid of being killed. Now, I'm making it harder for me to speak, so let me wrap this up here. In the end, they produce offspring that are worse and worse off than they would otherwise be. False pride and the attachment that parents have for their children complicate the problem, as they downplay the deeper implications of generational bad health on epigenetics and their offspring. So in other words, all this stuff they're putting in the food and the air, all these processed foods, there's food coloring, there's all kinds of stuff. They're literally putting substances and materials for mind control and materials that reduce the appeal of people, that reduce testosterone. They're really promoting them, and they're putting them in the food and so on and so forth. They're sneaking them in there. I come into grocery stores these days, I'm being fumed, and I wonder how much people are being fumed when I'm not there. And it's not a coincidence that the fumes are a huge part of why, I have less testosterone levels these days. Why I'm in worse shape, why I'm less attractive. You can tell by looking at me that I used to be extremely attractive, and now I look, maybe I'm like a 7 now, depending on how you slice it, okay? That is clearly the result of these fumes and these poisons and the brain hacking. Having a righteous and romantic physiology and testosterone levels, and where it comes into play with righteousness and grace, right? The grace of God, the beauty of God, where that beauty, that righteous masculine beauty, like the sun when it's being very beautiful, when it looks very beautiful, not when it's being so harsh, but when it's in the morning, when it's hitting just right, okay? When they reduce the expression of that, they did it in a way, I'm pretty sure it's unavoidable, they made it clear that they've done that here. You can tell by looking at me that I'm the most righteous person you've seen in your life, and that they've reduced my appeal through sabotage. My clothes, the dirt on my car, little things here and there. You say, why is that? Why is that? Why when I always see them is it like that? Why when I see them right now is it like that? Why all the bumper stickers? You can tell what's going on unless you're a complete idiot. And then for those who see the bumper stickers, it spells it out for them. So as you compare these first two models, right? Universal romantic justice, people getting their suitable helper, their soulmate, right? Soul is like sun, the soul, the heart of the matter, to truly get to the essence of romantic justice. Universal pinpointed moral precision and universal romantic justice. Okay, moral, mental, spiritual, and romantic justice. And you compare that to white Republican thinking and where the left overlaps with the right. You can tell that my model is far greater than your white models, your white supremacist models, your Democratic, Republican, Communist, Libertarian, your church models, your mosques, your synagogues. You can tell that my model is infinitely greater. And you people have let your culturalism and your cultural imperialism, your false pride, your racism, your ethnocentrism, your tribalism, you've let these things come between you and God. And it's profoundly sick that you don't want to give up your mere human rules, customs, and traditions, find the courage and the love for God that is needed to rally and obey God through me. Thank you.